right, ladies and gentlemen. Today we want to talk about the Athenian government and or Athenian democracy and the Roman Republic. And the first question when we're looking at this is, why government? Why do we have a government? In the modern world, we think about the various reasons that people form governments. Why do we need it? Well, a lot of times government thinks about all the things government provides for us. Protection. If we're ever invaded, they provide for the armies that protect you and I from harm. Police force and enforcing the laws that are there. Granted, there are certain things like in theories that we'll talk about, especially later this year and even into next year, that say the people give up certain rights in order for the government to protect them and obey the laws. So there's a lot that we'll talk about, and the reason why government. But in the ancient world, the real reason for government, I think, is for self-preservation. People needed to form groups in order to survive. Oftentimes, an ordinary person's day is I go to work, I come home, I visit with my family maybe, if I have a family. If I don't have a family, I just do whatever I like to do in my recreation. I go to sleep, and I go back to work again. And that's your day-to-day life. Maybe you find some things that you enjoy, so then you can take vacations and things like that. But it's to protect that interest of enjoying life and doing what we can. So the first thing we want to look at is the Athenian democracy. Athenian democracy. Now, this is something also that we talked about before. It was a direct democracy. A direct democracy means that people who were citizens directly voted on all the policies, or could directly vote on all the policies. In Athenian democracy, voting or rights went to citizens. A citizen is somebody who's obviously loyal to that city-state. So you had to be loyal to Athens. Well, how can you prove your loyalty? And it depends, of course, what time. So like Athenian democracy didn't start off as, hey, everybody gets to vote type of thing. No, it evolved over time. I think just like any others, it probably started out somewhat like a monarchy, or it did open up a democracy, but really the wealthy, it was more like an oligarchy. The wealthier people had the power. And eventually over time, that power was taken away from the wealthy and given to more and more people. So this isn't something that happened. And one of the ways that they did this is citizenship. Here in America, we have three ways to define citizenship. One is by blood. So if your parents are a citizen of the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. By territory, or by land, by soil. So if you're born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. Or the third one is naturalization, which is if you're a citizen of another country, you come here, swear a loyalty, and you take a pledge that you are a citizen, and that's an option that you have. Okay, but citizenship in Athens was kind of based on your parents, and they had to be free. So sometimes they said that one parent had to be a citizen, and you were automatically a citizen. Sometimes in their history, it had to be both parents had to be citizens in order for you to vote. So you can see how it changes or it evolves, because it could become more restrictive on what defines a citizen and what doesn't. Okay, but you had to be male in order to be a part of this. And what they did is they set up a council of 500. Okay. And what that meant was they broke up Athens basically into 10 tribes, and they had 50 representatives from each of those tribes, and they made up the Council of 500. So these are the people who probably debated, argued the various policies before they brought it to the people to vote on. Ostracism, one of the things that the Athenians did, of course, there are lots of people here in Athens. Some are free, some are slaves. I mean, Athens talks about democracy, talk about freedom, but yet they had slavery. People they conquered in battle, they forced them to be slaves. So it's funny, because here in America, we talk about how great America is as far as like being the land of the home of the free and land of the free and home of the brave. But yet we had slavery when we had signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and these things. So it's very important to realize that. Ostracism. One of the things I want to get back to here is this. So if somebody was deemed a threat to the society, a threat to Athens, they could be ostracized. It could be voted on. So it was, if they were seen as a danger, they were sent away to go off into the wilderness or whatever, never to come back. Citizens in Athens had to serve in the army, and they also had to serve on juries. They couldn't serve on juries until they were older, around 30. I think probably hoping to get more wisdom of life. So let's move on to the Roman Republic. A republic is another word for democracy. Okay, a republic is actually what the United States has. I always tell my students every year, if you were to ever see a multiple choice question that had, what government does the United States have? Is it a republic or a democracy? Technically, even though those are both correct, republic would be the best answer in that situation. So if there's a multiple choice question that says, what type of government does the United States have? Option A is republic and option B is democracy. They're looking for an answer to option A, okay, because that's what the United States has. It is an indirect democracy. Rome had that too. And it is sometimes referred to as a representative democracy because, as we talked about and defined democracy before, or indirect democracy, is when you elect people to represent you in the government. They make the decisions for you. It's too difficult for us in the modern world to have everyone or the adult citizens to vote on issues. Roman society was divided into two classes. You have the patricians, who are the wealthy landowners, and they could hold office in the government. Okay, the plebeians, or plebeians sometimes modern slang has turned them into plebes. These are the ordinary citizens, the workers. They could vote, but not hold government office. So they could vote, but they couldn't hold an office, all right? So in a way, the patricians are typically the wealthy landowners, okay? So they're the ones that have time to hold office. The people who are ordinary workers, they're trying to make a living day to day, so they don't have time to serve in office, and they didn't really get paid for it very much. 12 tables, that is the document or tablets that the rights and duties and the responsibilities of citizens of Rome, and it established the type of government they have, which is very similar to ours, a tripartite government. So you have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. The judicial branch, we're going to keep it simple. They basically, and I don't have it up here, they have 8 judges, and they oversaw the court systems. So those were positions that were elected. You have a Senate of 300 people who advise the councils. The Senate remains after Rome switches from a republic into an empire with an emperor, and we'll talk more about that later with Julius Caesar and some of the other emperors that come after him. But the Senate is there. And at that time, even though the emperor is making decisions, he looks for the wisdom of the Senate. Finally, the councils, the 2 councils, these are like the president or the executive branch. And they have the power to veto one another. But the reason why they had 2 leaders is because they thought this way, if one had to go to war, if one went to war, one could go out and lead the army, the other one could stay back and still make sure the government's running efficiently to do that. It's just something that they want to do. I think it was a way to check the power of the other and to keep that so one person couldn't get absolute rule, a protection thing. Now, one of the things I want to mention, and I forgot to mention it over here with Athens, is a gentleman by the name of Pericles. Pericles was a noble, and he comes later, and we'll talk about him when it comes to the Peloponnesian War. But Pericles does some great things as far as making democracy move forward. He offers payment for jobs. So this way the poorer citizens can get those jobs and not have to worry about it, because only the wealthy were really holding jobs. I mean, if you look at politics in America, most of the people who served as representatives and other things were wealthy citizens because they could hire other people to work the businesses and run the businesses they needed. It wasn't until later with Pericles that he offered poor people a job. So now poor people don't have to worry about making a living and buy the food that they need. So hopefully that understands and kind of gives you an illustration of how things change. Thank you.